They told me to log it as a mechanical error. That's what, Sergeant, I mean, Major Drexler said when he came down from the observation post, his face doing. That thing faces look do when they've witnessed something they don't have vocabulary for, jaw loose, eyes a half-second behind the rest of him. Log it as a mechanical error, he said. Atmospherics, which favorable wind. Some damn thing. I looked at him, which he looked at the ridge. The ridge, 3,000 and change meters out. I was still smoking. I'd been keeping this log for 11 months. 11 months of margin notes and timestamp corrections and double-checking grid coordinates because I am the kind of officer who checks, who rechecks, who never wants to be the person who got the number wrong. 11 months of writing confirmed and unconfirmed and pending assessment in neat columns. I'd logged malfunction. I'd logged weather interference, at which I'd logged the 73 reasons a shot shouldn't land where it lands. I'd never once logged mechanical error when what I meant was, I don't know how she did that, and it scares me a little. Drexler went back inside the post. I stayed. 3,200 meters, give or take. We'd measured it 3 times because the first 2 numbers felt like someone had punched the wrong digit. Private First Class Mara Voss had been awake for 31 hours, and her left shoulder had a knot in it the size of a golf ball from a bad fall 2 days prior on the eastern approach. She had eaten half a protein bar and 2 cups of coffee that tasted like burnt electrical wiring. She had been told, twice, by men with more rank and less patience, that the angle was unworkable, that the wind shear alone made it a statistical fantasy, that in my opinion, she should pull back and let the fire team handle it another way. In my opinion, she'd nodded. Both times. Yeah, very honestly, politely, which then she'd gotten back down on that rifle. I didn't write mechanical error, and I wrote what I saw, every word of it, because if you flatten this story into something manageable, something that fits in the box of what people expect, you lose the only part of it that's true. And the part that's true? She wasn't trying to prove anything. That's what nobody talks about. That's what Drexler look couldn't stand. Not the shot, the indifference of it. And the way she'd confirmed the hit, clicked the safety on, and asked if anyone had water, like she'd filed a form, like the mountain hadn't just moved. This is what happened, before the shot, during, after. All the things the official report will call atmospherics because the people writing official reports are terrified of the word undeniable, read it, plus every word. Then tell me it was the wind. The cold came in from the north and sat on everything like it owned the place. Well, I'd eyed my log. I'd my coffee, which had stopped being coffee somewhere around hour 7 and was now just a hot brown idea. I'd my binoculars. I'd a headache that had been living behind my left eye since Tuesday and had by now accumulated enough personal belongings that I was considering sending it a formal eviction notice. What I didn't have was a clean firing solution on the ridge designated Whiskey 4, now which sat at an elevation of approximately 2,700 meters and was currently hosting a sensor relay and 2 forward observers for a militia cell that had been chewing through our eastern supply corridor for 6 weeks. What I didn't have was a team willing to approach from the north. What I didn't have was air support. Weather had closed that window at 0400, and weather showed no inclination to change its mind. What I did have was Private First Class Mara Voss, not who had been lying in the prone position on the forward ledge for the last 40 minutes and had not moved except to breathe. I checked my watch, then my log. I made a note. 0611 and Voss in position. Target unengaged. Wind 14 knots NNE and range estimated 3,200 meters plus. Advise against. I'd written advise against 17 times in this log. It is a phrase that doesn't thing. A bureaucratic speed bump. It means, I don't think this will work, and also don't blame me if it doesn't. It is the coward's annotation. I wrote it anyway because 11 months of this had trained certain habits into me, and not all of them were honorable. Lieutenant Cass Obrecht came up beside me, and he smelled like diesel and the protein powder he mixed with everything because he'd read something online once and never fully recovered. He raised his own binoculars, looked at the ridge, looked at Voss, looked at me. "She's still on it," he said. "And yes. Drexler's going to rotate her out. Drexler's inside drinking something warm and not looking at the ridge." Obrecht made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound, the kind men make when they know something is true and dislike it, and have decided to don't think about it. I focused my binoculars on Voss. She was like 24 years old, and I knew this because I kept the files, and I kept the files because I am the person who keeps the files. I knew she'd grown up in a part of the country where the winters are honest about themselves. I knew she'd enlisted at 19 after 2 years of a college scholarship that she'd described in her intake interview as technically still active, theoretically. I knew she'd placed in the top 4% of her marksmanship cohort, and that her cohort evaluator had written, "Voss takes longer than ideal to begin a sequence, but doesn't appear to understand the concept of a miss." I'd read that twice, and then written it in the margins of my log for reasons I couldn't have articulated cleanly. What the file didn't tell me, what files never tell you, was how she looked when the wind shifted and she didn't move. When the cold pressed down like a thumb between the shoulder blades and she didn't move. When Drexler had come out 20 minutes ago and told her the angle was unworkable and the range was fantasy, and he needed the ledge for the spotting scope, and she had said, very quietly, "I need 4 more minutes." And he'd said, "Voss?" And she'd said, "4 minutes, Sergeant Major." And he'd stood there for a moment making the same sound Obrecht had just made, and then gone back inside. She kind of didn't look at him when he left. She was looking at the ridge. 4 minutes had become 40. Nobody had gone back out to tell her to stop. I'd been skeptical of Voss from the beginning. I will say this plainly because I think it matters and because I am tired of people in this log and in this operation pretending we all arrived here unbiased and open-minded and without a single inherited assumption in our skulls. She was smaller, basically, than the rifle looked like it wanted her to be. That, I guess, was the first thing. The accuracy international like she'd been assigned was a blunt instrument by nature, not cruel, but demanding, yet the kind of system that asks a lot from the body behind it. And the first time I'd watched her set up, I'd had a thought I am not proud of, which was, this is going to be a problem. 2 days later, she'd put 3 rounds inside a 6-inch group at 1,800 meters with a crosswind that had my own team's designated marksman complaining about statistical impossibility. I updated my internal assessment. I didn't tell her I'd updated it because she hadn't asked, and also because I'd the feeling, watching her, that my opinion of her abilities was a thing she had never once needed. That's the part that got under my skin. Not the competence. The completeness of her. Like she had built herself into a finished thing without leaving any doors open for other people's doubts to come through. Corporal Fenwick, who was our unit's designated marksman and who had the group at 1,800 meters and a very functional ego to accompany it, had spent the first week watching Voss with the expression of a man who has just found out the restaurant he's been telling everyone is his secret spot has a line around the block. He'd eventually said, to me, not to her, "She's patient." "Yes," I said. "More patient than she should be. He stopped, picked up his coffee. It's like she just doesn't get nervous." I looked at Voss across the post. She was cleaning her rifle with the focus of someone doing a crossword puzzle. Not urgent, not performative. Like, just present. Plus, I said, "She does and it doesn't show where you're looking for it." Fenwick didn't have an answer for that. He went kind of back to his coffee. I went back to my log and wrote, Voss. Patience as weaponized stillness. Investigate further. At 06:22, the wind shifted. I know the exact time because I was looking at my watch when it happened. One of my habits, noting the time when the atmosphere changes, because atmosphere changes are where engagements go wrong, and I like to know where wrong started. The shift wasn't dramatic. 6 knots, to 9, NNE to NNW. The kind of thing that turns a clean shot into a prayer. Voss made one adjustment, which I watched her do it. Subtle, which a millimeter of elevation, on a breath held slightly longer than the last one. Like she, I think, had been reading the air this whole time the way other people read faces, watching for what it was about to do before it did it. Obrecht next to me. Does she know the wind shifted? Yes. How do you know? She knows. I lowered my binoculars, looked at him, raised them again. Because she's, look, still there, I said. The position at Whiskey 4 wasn't a simple target. I want I'd to be clear about this because simple targets are something else, and this wasn't that. The relay sat behind a natural rock formation on the eastern face of the ridge, partially masked, thermally inconsistent, because of the outcropping's mass, and positioned at an angle that required a shot to arc into the gap rather than drive through it. Fenwick had looked at the geometry for 3 minutes and then said, "You'd need to curve it." He meant this as a reason to stop talking about it. And bullets don't curve, and they travel along calculated arcs influenced by gravity, spin drift, wind, and the specific personality of the atmosphere on any given morning. But they don't curve the way you'd need them to curve to thread that gap cleanly. The solution Voss had been working through, I found out later, involved a specific angle of approach that used the ridge's own eastward slope to redirect the projectile's terminal path. A calculated spin drift compensation that she'd been testing in her head for 2 hours before she'd taken the ledge, and an elevation hold that accounted for the thermal differential between the valley air and the cold mass sitting above the ridgeline. She had not, explained any of this to Drexler. She had not explained it to Fenwick. She had not explained it to me. She had explained it to exactly nobody because, as I understood later when I finally asked, and she wasn't certain it would work, and she didn't see any advantage in narrating a failure out loud before it happened. At 6:31, Obrecht said, "She should pull back. The cold is getting worse and the angle hasn't changed." I said, "The angle changed when the wind shifted." That doesn't improve the angle." "I know." He looked at me. "Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying she thinks it does." He looked back at Voss. She was motionless on the ledge, and her breath was barely visible, small, controlled, spaced like Morse code for "I am still here, I am still here, I am still here." I wrote in my log, 0631. Voss still in position, no change in team confidence. My confidence, unclear, logging anyway. I'd not written my confidence unclear in 11 months. The act of writing it made my headache pulse once, sharp, behind the left eye. The hill that Whiskey 4 sat on was called Kriva by the local population and the Ugly One by our team, which wasn't creative, was accurate. A gray, hunched thing with bad drainage and a permanently displeased expression, like it had been dropped there by accident and had been sulking about it ever since. The militia had chosen it well. I'll give them that. Excellent fields of observation. The relay they'd positioned gave them 30-kilometer coverage on our eastern approach, which was why we'd lost 2 supply convoys in 6 weeks, and why I'd a sergeant major breathing diesel into the observation post every morning with new angles on how we were going to lose a third. Neutralizing the relay was a logistical problem with no pleasant solutions. Air, closed, ground approach, prohibitively exposed on 3 sides, indirect fire, range possible, accuracy unlikely, without risking the civilian settlement 800 meters east of the objective. Our sniper engagement, theoretically viable, practically fantasy. I'd written those words myself 4 days ago, in a brief I'd sent up the chain. I was considering whether to amend that brief when it happened. Basically, she fired once. I know people expect more drama in this moment. A sustained sequence, a spotter's radio call, some kind of mechanical ceremony, plus once, one round, plus, the sound reached us after the fact. That's always the disorientation of long-range work. The sound arriving like an afterthought, like the rifle was embarrassed to be heard at all. I'd my binoculars on the ridge. The relay, a hardened sensor housing the size of a dormitory refrigerator positioned in the gap between the rock formation and the ridge wall, was there. Then it wasn't. Not dramatically, not explosively. It simply, I think, stopped being a relay and started being components. Which is a distinction that matters to the people whose supply convoys were going to move tonight. Obrecht dropped his binoculars and made no sound at all, which was, from Obrecht, the loudest possible response. I didn't drop my binoculars. I moved them to Voss, and she was still on the rifle. She didn't move TBH for a full 6 seconds after the hit confirmation, long enough that I thought something was wrong. That the concussion had gotten her, or the cold had finally bitten through, or something had gone sideways in the way things go sideways when you've been too still for too long in temperatures that don't forgive. Then she clicked, the safety on, sat up, and rolled her left shoulder once, wincing. The golf ball knot, I found out later. She'd had to hold compensatory tension through the whole sequence to keep stable, and it had cost her, and looked back over her shoulder at the post. Does anyone have water? She said. I'm completely out. Drexler came outside. He stood at the entrance of the post for a moment, long enough, looking at the ridge, looking at Voss, looking at me. His face was doing the thing I described before, the vocabulary failure thing. Log it, he said finally. I am, I said. Log it in my opinion as, I'm logging what happened, Sergeant Major. A pause. A long one. The cold moved between us. Fine, he said, and went inside. I looked at Voss, and she had found water. Fenwick had appeared from somewhere with a bottle, standing next to her now with the expression of a man who has just revised a significant internal document. She drank half of it in one pull, handed it back, which looked at the ridge once more with an expression. I couldn't read. Then started breaking down her position. Not satisfied. Not triumphant, which just finished. Like she'd completed a form and filed it and was ready for the next one. I wrote in look. My log 0634. Target at Whiskey 4 neutralized. 1 round. Pretty much Voss, M, PFC. Range measured post-engagement at 3,247 meters. Wind shift NNW 9 knots at engagement plus 1 adjustment observed prior to firing. Engagement classified in current brief as theoretically viable, practically fantasy. Recommend amending brief. That night, I sat with my coffee, which was impossibly worse than the mornings, and tried to write the incident summary. In my opinion, it wrote 7 drafts. The first 3 explained the shot in terms of favorable conditions. The next 2 buried the lead under tactical context. Draft 6 started with Private First Class Voss demonstrated competent long-range marksmanship, and I deleted that before it could embarrass me further. Draft 7 began. At 0634, 1 round was fired. The target was eliminated. The range was 3,247 meters. These facts don't require annotation, and I sat with that for a while. The headache pulsed, and the coffee cooled. Then I wrote one more line below it. The shooter asked for water before she asked for anything else. I think that matters. I'm not sure yet why. Outside, somewhere across the base, Fenwick was talking to Voss. I could hear pieces of it through the canvas. Not words, just cadence. His voice, I think, doing the thing voices do when a person is trying very hard to seem like they're not asking a question while clearly asking a question. Her voice was quieter, even. And like weather that has settled, which I didn't go outside. I wasn't ready yet to talk to her directly. I'd the feeling that talking to Voss directly would require me to abandon several comfortable assumptions. And I'm a man who abandons comfortable assumptions slowly and with great resentment. I wrote instead. I always write instead. But I left the last line of the incident summary blank, a space like, for whatever came next, because something, in my opinion, was going to come next. Something always does in places where the ridge is still smoking and the people responsible for it are asking for water like they just got back from a walk. I knew that. I could feel for what it's worth. It the way you feel a weather shift. Not in the data, not yet, but in the air. In the thing the air is about to do. I picked up my coffee, put it down, went, back to the log. Plus, started a new page. The brief from command arrived at 0300. And I know it was 0300 because I was awake, and I am always awake at 0300. Because 0300 is the hour that belongs to people who cannot stop thinking. And I am constitutionally one of those people. My coffee was cold. My log was open to a fresh page. The bass was doing its nighttime thing. Generators humming, somewhere a door banging in the wind, the particular quality of silence that forms when 50 people are pretending to sleep. And the brief was 7 pages, the relevant portion was 1 paragraph. Militia cell at grid reference NE7 has established a secondary relay following the confirmed destruction of Whiskey 4 asset. New position designated Kilo 9. Assessed range from current forward position, 3,400 to 3,600 meters. Terrain analysis suggests single viable engagement window. Assessment, high difficulty honestly, engagement. Recommend extraction and repositioning of forward element before cell reestablishes full corridor coverage. Window, 48 hours. I read it twice. Then I read the range estimate again, which 3,400 to 3,600 meters. I wrote in my log 0303. Brief received, Kilo 9. New relay. Estimated 3,400 to 3,600 meters. Recommend extraction per command. Then I sat there for a while not writing anything. The morning briefing was at 0700. The Drexler ran it. He had the energy of a man who had already made a decision and was now performing the ritual of the briefing as a formality before announcing it. He laid out Kilo 9 and the range, the terrain, the 48-hour window. Command recommends repositioning, he said. We move the element 800 meters west, set up on the secondary ridge, and work the problem from there. Fenwick, Ike across the table. That secondary ridge gives us a clear angle on the northern approach, but we're looking at compromised concealment. If the cell has shifted their OBS position after yesterday, they have, said Obrecht. He had done the overnight terrain analysis. He looked like a man who had also not slept, but for different reasons than me. 2 of their forward spotters relocated to the southern tree line by 2,100. And the secondary ridge puts us inside their observable field by 30 minutes after first light. So we've 30 minutes, Drexler said, at best. The table went quiet, everyone doing the arithmetic. 30 minutes of concealment against a 3,400-meter target with a cell. That had already proven adaptive. That had already shown they could reconstitute a destroyed position inside of 18 hours. Voss was at the end of the table. She had a cup of something, not coffee, and one of those herbal things Fenwick kept giving her because he'd read something, and she was looking at the map with the focused blankness of someone doing long multiplication in their head. Private Voss, Drexler said, not unkindly, but pointed. You want to weigh in. She looked up. I want to see the terrain photos of Kilo 9. Drexler pushed a folder across the table. She opened it, looked at the images, aerial, probably 2 days old, showing the position and the ridge geometry and the approach angles. She looked at them for 40 seconds. The western face has a thermal sink, she said. Cold air pooling from the drainage valley. It'll suppress wind drift on the lower trajectory. If I approach from below the sink's upper boundary, Voss. Drexler's voice was patient in the way that patience sometimes means stop. The range is 3,400 minimum, possibly 3,600. We have no confirmed firing solution. The command is recommending extraction. I know what command is recommending. A beat. That engagement window is 48 hours, she said. They'll have the corridor back online in 40. We lose the eastern supply route again. The settlement at Bravo 3 goes without medical resupply for... I'm aware of. The settlement at Bravo 3. Then I want to look at the western approach to Kilo 9. Drexler looked at her. For what it's worth, then at me, then at the map. And log this as a preliminary assessment, he said to me. Not in TBH, authorized engagement. I wrote 0714. Voss requests terrain assessment, western approach, Kilo 9. Logged, in my opinion, as preliminary, which Voss went back to the terrain photos. I went TBH, with her to the western approach. Someone had to. Plus, Drexler assigned Fenwick and me, which I understood as Drexler's way of ensuring two sets of skeptical eyes on the situation without having to be one of them personally. While the western approach to Kilo 9 was a 40-minute movement across terrain that was doing its level best to be unpleasant. Loose shale, a drainage gully that had no business being as deep as it was. Wind from 3 directions, which is the atmosphere's way of being difficult on purpose. Voss moved through it like she had prior knowledge of the ground. Not fast, but without wasted motion. I've watched enough people move through bad terrain to know the difference between someone compensating and someone calculating. And she was calculating. Every step chosen before she made it, her body doing the math slightly ahead of itself. Fenwick, next to, me, watching her. She's got the shoulder wrapped. I'd noticed. Medical tape over the collar of her jacket, not quite concealed, the knot from the fall. It had gotten worse overnight. According to the medic's note I'd logged that morning, Voss, shoulder inflammation, advised light duty, advised against prone position extended hold. The sort of medic had written advised against, which I'd recognized the phrase. Fenwick said quietly, not quite to me. She didn't tell Drexler how bad it's. No. You going to? I looked at the back of Voss's head. Her pace hadn't changed. Her right hand was open, loose, a conscious habit to avoid tension migration up the arm, into the shoulder. To be fair, she was managing it. Precisely, like something she'd calculated before we left. Not yet, I said. Fenwick made a sound, not a word. The western approach opened onto a natural shelf. Limestone, flat, with a partial overhang that would provide both concealment and a windbreak from the northern shear. From the shelf, the sightline to Kilo 9 was, if not clean, and then workable in a way that the morning's terrain photos hadn't suggested. Voss walked the shelf, which lay down on it, put her eye to a ranging device, and 3,380, she said. Fenwick checked his own unit. 3,380 confirmed, I think, which still outside any reasonable... Thermal sink is here. She pointed at a line maybe 30 meters below the shelf's edge, a visible temperature gradient where the cold drainage air met the warming valley. Wind, to be fair. Influence above the sink. 17 knots from the northwest. Below 4, maybe 5. The bullet passes through both. Zones, but it exits the upper zone at the far end of its trajectory, not the beginning. Drift at that end is correctable. Fenwick looked at me. I looked at the shelf. I looked at the drainage valley. I looked at Kilo 9, which was 3,380 meters away, and surrounded by the kind of terrain that doesn't care about your timelines or your supply routes or the settlement at Bravo 3. The overhang will affect her follow-through optics, Fenwick said. She won't get full confirmation on impact. I'll know, said Voss. Fenwick opened his mouth. I'll know by the flight time and the signature, she said. I've calculated the terminal arc. If it threads the approach, I'll know. A pause. Wind. The drainage valley doing its quiet, cold thing. If it doesn't pretty much thread, Fenwick said. The cell knows we're active. They'll relocate again. We lose, I guess. Was the window, we lose the supply route, I know what we lose, said Voss. She, I guess, wasn't sharp about it, which not defensive. I guess just accurate. Like she was describing the weather. Plus, like she had looked at all of it. The consequences of success, the consequences of failure, the shoulder, the range, the 48 hours, and had laid it all out on a flat surface in her head, and was standing next to it, examining it, not afraid of it. That's the part I wrote down later. And at length, the not afraid of it part. Not because she had no fear. I stopped believing that theory somewhere around the previous morning's ridge smoke, but because her relationship to the fear was different. Like TBH, she'd introduced herself to it early, gotten its name, understood its habits, and it had TBH stopped surprising her. I said, "Your shoulder." She looked at me. The medic said light duty. The medic says a lot of things. Voss. My shoulder is functional. It will affect stabilization during extended hold. I've adjusted my compensation posture. She said it the way you say the drainage pipe needs replacing. A logistics problem. A solved one. If it cramps during the hold, then I'll make the adjustment before I fire. And if you can't? She held my look. Even. That complete quality again. That finished thing with no open doors. Then I'll have made a bad call, she said, and we'll deal with it. But I don't think it's a bad call. I looked at Fenwick. He looked at the target line. He had the expression of a man who has run the math and doesn't enjoy the answer the math is giving him. Log it, he said, not to me, to Voss. Tell me what you need. She needed 3 hours. I don't mean to set up, I mean to wait. The thermal sink's behavior was time variable. It compressed in the late morning as valley air warmed and then settled into a stable layer by early afternoon. And she needed to be on the shelf at the moment the layer stabilized, which meant she needed to be there 2 hours early and wait. 2 hours prone on limestone with a taped shoulder and a sight line to something 3,380 meters away. I stayed. Fenwick stayed. We didn't talk much. He had a habit of clicking the retention clasp on his binoculars case. Open, closed, open, closed, which in other circumstances I'd have found maddening, but which in this one I barely registered. Because my attention was almost entirely on Voss, who wasn't clicking anything, who wasn't doing anything at all except being present on the shelf in a way that felt almost geological. I wrote in my log, which I don't always know what to write in silences like that, so I write descriptions, the light, the terrain, the behavior of the wind on the drainage slope. Small things, specific things. My way of staying present when present is uncomfortable. At hour 1, I wrote, Voss hasn't moved quite a bit in 44 minutes. No visible sign of shoulder compromise, no adjustment to position, which Fenwick has clicked his binoculars case approximately 200 times. I didn't count. This is an estimate which at hour 1 and 40 minutes I wrote, thermal layer appears to be stabilizing. Wind behavior at shelf edge has shifted. Voss made one adjustment, fractional, right hand, 3 minutes ago and hasn't moved since. And she knows, at 1 hour and 52 minutes, the shoulder. She had shifted, not dramatically. But I'd been watching long enough to know her stillness, to know its quality, and something had changed in the region of her left side. A micro-tension, a compensation she was working through in real time. The knot had tightened, plus I could see it in the angle of her neck. She held anyway. Plus, I have thought about this part more than any other. More than the shot. More than the range number. More than Drexler's face. Basically, the hold. Because in my opinion, the hold was the decision. And the decision wasn't fire or don't fire. The decision was acknowledge the pain as information and use it correctly. Not ignore it. She wasn't ignoring it. I, for what it's worth, could see her not ignoring it, see her running it through her system and calculating what it cost and whether the cost was still worth paying. That's different. That's something else entirely. Which I know what pain as willpower looks like. I've been in enough situations where someone grits through something and calls it strength and then pays for it downstream in ways they didn't budget for. This wasn't that. This was, I know exactly how much this hurts. I know exactly what it will allow me to do and for how long. I have 3 more minutes in this position and I need 2 of them. I can do this. A calculation, and to be honest, not a sacrifice. The distinction wrecked me a little. I'm still not finished with it. She fired at 1346. Fenwick confirmed the thermal layer at stable minus, meaning the optimal window would close in approximately 90 seconds. She didn't need 90 seconds. She'd been at the window for 6 minutes, working the breath sequence, working the drift correction, working the shoulder into a configuration that held. 1 round. Suppressed this time, and a different system than the previous morning. The sound, from where I was positioned, it was less than the wind. Flight time, for honestly, a round at that range is between 4 and 5 seconds. It feels much longer. I watched Kilo 9 through the binoculars. At second 4, the relay. Actually, gone, not explosively. The round threaded the approach angle she'd calculated, passed through the sensor housing laterally, and the result was structural failure rather than detonation. To be fair, quieter, which cleaner. Fenwick made no sound. Plus, he put his binoculars down. He picked them back up, put them down again. Basically, confirmed, he said. Confirmed, I said. Plus, on the shelf, Voss had not yet moved. She was working through the sequence in reverse. Safety, clear, slow extraction from position. When she finally sat back, her left arm stayed low. The shoulder, to be fair, had given what it had. Plus, her face, unreadable. Not satisfied, not pained. Something I didn't have a word for and still don't. Quite. Finished? And again. But this time with weight in it. Like finishing something that had cost more than she'd publicly priced it. Good, Fenwick said, going to her. Yeah. She rotated her arm carefully, made a face. The first purely involuntary expression I'd seen from her in 2 days. Need to see the medic. Yeah, you do. Don't. She stopped. Started again. Don't log the shoulder detail in the incident summary. She said it to Fenwick, but she was looking at me. I held her look for a moment. I'd thought about 11 months of logs. Thought about advise against and theoretically viable, practically fantasy and all the careful little annotations I'd constructed to protect myself from being wrong about things. I'll log what I saw, I said, which is a confirmed engagement at 3,380 meters. Everything else is assessment. She held my look 1 more beat, nodded once, looked away. I wrote 1,346, target at Kilo 9 neutralized. 1 round. Voss, M, PFC, range, confirmed 3,380 meters. Thermal basically, layer used. Wind drift corrected for dual zone trajectory. Engagement duration from first position, 1 hour, 54 minutes. I wrote, basically, engagement conditions. Challenging. I didn't write. She was in pain from the second hour and held anyway. The calculation she made was more intelligent than any recommendation in the preceding 48 hours of command briefs, including my own. I thought it, though. Clearly, like a fact that had arrived too large for the column it was, supposed to fit in. The sort of Eastern supply route opened that night, The convoy moved, at 2100. Medical resupply reached, to be fair, Bravo 3x0 200. Plus, Voss was in the medical bay when the convoy clearance came through. I know because I logged it. She was out by 600 the next morning, shoulder immobilized, light duty restriction, actual light duty this time. The medic was very firm about it. Drexler backed the medic up, which was about as close to an acknowledgement as Drexler was likely to produce. Like, Fenwick brought her coffee. She drank it without comment, which Fenwick took as approval. I didn't go to see her. I'd the log. I wrote in it instead. The final incident summary ran to 4 pages. I cut for what it's worth. It to 2. Then to 1. The 1-page version ended. Engagement objectives achieved. Recommend citation review for PFC Voss, M+. Then I added 1 sentence below it, below the official end, in the margin, where margin notes live, where I keep the things that don't fit the column. She knew what it would cost before she got on the shelf. She got on the shelf anyway, pretty much. That's not strength. That's something more specific than strength. I don't have the right word yet. 3 days later, I was outside at 0300, my usual hour, with coffee that had given up the pretense of being good and a new page in the log. The ridge where Whiskey 4 had been was dark. Kind of Kilo 9 was dark. The corridor was open. Across the base, 1 light was on. The marksmanship bay. I could see, actually, it from where I was sitting. I don't know what she was doing in there at 0300. Running sequences, maybe. Plus, dry practice. Reading wind tables. Something that didn't require the shoulder to be at full capacity, but kept her inside the problem she was always apparently working on. I thought about going over. Asking. I picked up my coffee instead. Wrote in my log, 0307. The corridor is open. Bravo 3 has medical resupply. The pretty much eastern approach is workable again, at least for now. Paused. The cell will reconstitute. They always do. They'll find another ridge, another angle, another relay position. And then someone will look at the geometry and write, theoretically viable, practically fantasy, in a brief and send it up the chain. Paused again. The light in the marksmanship bay is on. I closed the log, looked at the dark ridge. Did not finish the thought. Some things, it turns out, don't need the annotation.